There we go. Now we're live. We're live here on Zoom. We're live on Facebook. We're multi-channel webcasting, Clay. This is all new for us. But super glad you are here today. And for those of you who are coming in, see already people are trickling in one after another. So awesome to have you. Obviously, the conversation today around stress, coping, and resilience is topical and relevant and a felt need. And one of my favorite definitions, simple, practical definitions of leadership is see the need, meet the need. So if we can do what we can to fill gaps, to know what people are navigating right now, collectively and individually, and provide tools in the toolbox to help with that, that's what we're here for. So we got like 160 people here live right now, Clay. People are going to be rewatching this. People are live on Facebook. We're super glad y'all tuning in. If you get a chance, drop into the chat who you are, where you're coming from, what your role is, and even just a very quick temperature check on a scale of 1 to 5. How you doing today? 1's on the low end, 5 is on the high end. Just a nice check-in to see how people are showing up today. And with us, we have Dr. Clayton Cook, who's been a huge advocate for this work since day one, and probably my favorite person just to hang out with and listen to, because your wisdom is both inspirational but hyper practical. So Clay, take it away, my friend. What do we got?
Yeah, we're going to just dive into the topic of stress, coping, and resiliency. Hopefully go over some nuggets that could be meaningful for educators in their professional and private lives, and highly applicable to think about what kids' needs are in the current circumstances and beyond. I mean, this is relevant content whether we're experiencing a global pandemic or whether we're back to the normal realities of day in, day out educational experiences. So thank you all for tuning in. We are going to go over really topics that could be relevant, as well as strategies and techniques you can take away with you. And please, if there's any questions that come up along the way, Houston will be monitoring those, and let's stop and chat and make this as interactive as possible. So we have this course. There's also an on-demand course around stress, coping, and resiliency. This is also an opportunity to learn about the topic more and realize the strategies and practices and routines that we have under our control to enhance our ability to manage stress, to cope with adversity, and ultimately promote our resiliency. You know, the topic of resiliency was originally thought about as people who are under the most extreme adverse circumstances and somehow they're achieving normal development. And it was viewed as that they were some genetic specimens that maybe NASA needed to investigate, that they were just genetically predisposed. There's nothing you can do. We just needed to study them because they're like marvels of humanity. And research has increasingly revealed that resiliency is something that you can actually cultivate, learn, and actually become. You can become a resilient person. And so hopefully we'll go over some of the things we have under our control to become resilient, which means we're able to basically survive and thrive in life. And there's different components. I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the current circumstance. Globally, virtually every human on our planet right now is collectively dealing with something. You could say it's a natural experiment in terms of human coping and resiliency, because we're going to learn a whole heck of a lot. School has to look different when we get back to normal. School has to look different now. We have to support the coping and resiliency of educators and students. We're all dealing with adjustments and changes, coping with new realities, and we also have to recognize that some people are dealing with more challenges and circumstances. We're starting to really see the inequities and disparities start to manifest that we knew were there, but now we're starting to get the data on who's actually struggling the most in the face of the current circumstances. We have to apply an equity lens to this work when we're thinking about both staff, students, and families who are in the most need. How do we actually mobilize the supports that people need so they could manage the circumstances and still maintain healthy development and functioning? So I just want to talk about the content here, is somewhat agnostic to whether we're going through a super adverse circumstance like COVID-19, but it's highly relevant given the current situation that we're all confronted with, because there's uncertainty, there's definitely adversity, and there's a need to maintain hope and optimism. I take the stance, I don't like the term self-care. I don't think it's scientifically accurate. What we're trying to do is help people be able to manage stress that's inherent in adversity, that's inherent in life. You can't get away from stress. I think sometimes the self-care movement leads us to want to avoid and run away from stress. But if we avoid and run away from stress, we tend to run away from meaningful, values-based living. And so I want to really emphasize the notions of coping and resiliency over the notion of self-care. So I want us to check in. This is something we do with kids, and this is, if you're familiar with the Ruler program or other programs, this is a way to check in. There's two dimensions of how we're feeling. There's an energy level, and then there's a mood level, and we can intersect these. We like to think about setting it up like, your energy levels like a battery. Sometimes you're feeling super low, or sometimes you're feeling really high and energetic. And just kind of do a little check-in. Where's your energy level? The next thing we ask people to check in with is their mood. And from a kid-friendly standpoint, we've tested different ways to talk about this. You need to make sure kids can comprehend what the heck you're actually having them rate. So we usually use like good mood, bad mood. And that's like whether you're feeling like, we use images. A bright sunny day, your mood's really positive, you're feeling upbeat, you're feeling great. Or sometimes our mood's feeling pretty crummy and bad, and that's like a stormy, rainy day, we're feeling mucky. Where are you at in terms of your mood? Now, what that helps us do is we can intersect those, and we can get a sense of where are we at in terms of our energy level and our mood. Our goal is to really move to this place where we're feeling and functioning our best. And there's things we can do, strategies, practices, and routines that we can incorporate into our daily lives to get us into this kind of optimal state of being. And that's when we have sufficient energy and we're in a good mood. Now, if we have a lot of energy, but we're in a crummy mood, that usually means we're anxious, we're worried or agitated about something. There's something we can do to actually regulate that internal state in response to the environmental situations we're dealing with, and we can move towards a more optimal state. If we have low energy and we're feeling crummy or not so good, we're usually bummed out, we're sad, we're sullen, and there's things we can do to get a better handle on our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to get us out of kind of that funk and into a more optimal state. And sometimes we're just low energy, relatively pretty upbeat mood. That means we're tired, fatigued, or overworked. And there's things we can do in terms of rest and restoration that can bring us back to a more optimal state of feeling and functioning. And so this is one way that if you really want to be intentional at checking in and being intentional about doing stuff, these ideas of self-report ratings for kids or staff or ourselves is an effective way to just do a check-in, identify where you're at, and then begin to select things that you can do. But a lot of people are curious about what are the strategies, practice, and routines they can incorporate. They open up that bag of tricks and it's empty, and that's what I want to cover here. So one way I think about this is adults who are unwell have a hard time producing well children. And we need to think about that adults who are struggling socially and emotionally are going to have difficulties promoting the social and emotional well-being of kids. That's why it's not selfish, it's not vanity for people to focus on themselves first before they begin to think about how they are best in the service of others. And we have to recognize that educators are in what I consider pressure cooker situations. With all the pressures, educators are expected to do everything. And so there is a lot of pressure that educators are in while they're doing some of the most meaningful work possible. So it's being able to manage the pressure and the outside noise that educators often feel in order to continue to stay plugged in and manage their own social emotional well-being as they try and strive to create optimal experiences for students. So the way I look at this is there's like a symbiotic or transactional relationship. Adult SEL, that's a concept now. Not only do we think about SEL from a child-focused lens, we got to think about adult SEL, but adult social emotional behavioral functioning impacts kids' social emotional behavioral functioning. And in turn, how kids function socially, emotionally, and behaviorally impact the adult's well-being. And so you can imagine if, and I have two of them, both of my daughters were raised, and unfortunately I have to claim the DNA side of this. They're plugged in, but they're strong-willed kids. And so they really require us to parent a lot, and that can impact. There's different temperaments or temperamental predispositions. When kids are born, you can do a heel stick test. Every baby cries. Some babies actually soothe and return back to not crying relatively quick. Some babies continue to cry. That's been shown to be an indicator of temperamental sensitivity, meaning they're sensitive to environmental input, and that's predictive of whether kids are going to need to learn skills and strategies to better regulate their emotions in response to environmental stimuli. And those kids become adults ourselves. And so there is this relationship between having a kid and dealing with students, or having your own kid who might be more temperamentally sensitive, and that can impact your well-being. So we have to up the ante to be able to regulate ourselves if we're going to help co-regulate our kid and teach skills and strategies. And so it is this transactional relationship.
Out of curiosity, Clay, where do you fall on that scale? If you were to be heel pricked, do you think this was natural for you, or that you've done a lot of personal work to get here?
Oh, no, none of it's natural. It's learning skills and strategies to regulate my biology. And yes, we can change that over time, but that's who I am. And it's also a strength that I bring in, and I typically plug in, and I'm excited about stuff, but I also can get upset, and those things can potentially cause me to say and do things that I would later regret. And it becomes something that I've learned about myself. I have to understand the things that set me off and occasion that behavior, so I can be better prepared to manage myself and my interactions in the world, because that defines who I am. It's not just like a deficit that I have. It is also part of why I look at my daughters and say, they're going to be great if they can manage their emotions. Because they are energetic, they plug in, they're passionate about stuff.
Yeah. The quote that drives me crazy is, character's what we do when no one's watching. I'm like, I'm a really good person when the pressure's off, you know? Character's what we do when people are watching. Character's what we do when we're facing embarrassment or rejection or failure or frustration or claustrophobia with our family all around. Like, right now is a test of our character, and we build that character over a very long period of time. And it's usually not in moments of comfort. We get tested when it's hard.
Oh, I love that spin. Yeah, because you always hear that. And it is really when we're under pressure and people are watching, that your character can really come out if you develop the skills and strategies to regulate self in the face of circumstances that typically tend to get the best of you, where you say and do things where you're like, oh, that's not my cool, calm, and collected. And the values I have, that behavior was actually pretty inconsistent with the values I have as a person.
Yeah, alignment, such a big deal.
So when we look at this, I'm just a quick thing. I don't want to make this as a blame the educators, because this is a faulty message that who cares about what the environmental circumstances people are in? You just got to suck it up, develop the skills, and manage yourself, because there are working conditions that optimize people's well-being and functioning. And we need to advocate, we need to work with our colleagues to create optimal working conditions. So as educators, we know educators thrive within environments where they feel like valued, respected members. They have balanced and manageable workloads, not implementation overload. They have supportive leadership. They're provided with the resources and supports to be successful. And we know kids thrive within certain learning conditions. That's their environment. And so I don't want this message, although I'm going to focus on individual strategies and skills we can acquire to better cope and maintain resiliency in the face of environmental circumstances, we also have to do the environmental work. And so the mixed message is like blaming people when they're in pretty toxic environments, will just suck it up. All you need to do is acquire these skills and get over it. It's an and both phenomenon. We want to optimize healthy environments, and we want to equip people with the skills, strategies, practice, and routines that enable them to be able to manage the stress, the adversity that's inherent in the job of being an educator. So a couple of things about stress and adversity, and I really want to rip through this stuff. It's unavoidable. We're hardwired with it. You're going to experience it. There's a reason why we have it, and you're not going to get out of life regardless without it. Everybody's going to experience adversity. Now, the thing is, some people experience way, way, way more adversity. Poverty, for example, is a surrogate variable that's associated with way more adverse circumstances that people are confronted with. And so there's certain things we want to eradicate because they're disproportionately, we have people being exposed to adverse circumstances that impact their well-being and performance. So I'm going to take us back to 8th grade science class for a second. So you remember homeostasis. The homeostasis concept is you're in an ideal state. Your temperature, your glucose level, your blood, your heart rate, everything's in an ideal state. So a stressor is anything that knocks us out of what we call homeostatic balance. You start to get ramped up, and that's because it's a nervous system response. When we're in kind of a cool, calm, collected, homeostatic, and we have that homeostatic balance, we're in what we call the parasympathetic response. Now, things can knock us out of that, and it activates the sympathetic response, and that's the stress response, and we start to get mobilized. We really want to do something when that happens. I like to think about, this Robert Sapolsky is a great read. He's an anthropologist who really studies, the stress response and how it has an impact. There's an interesting thought around why don't zebras get ulcers? If we were all zebra on a Serengeti plains and we had a stressor and it was a lion, what would we do? We would run because we'd choose the flight response. Quickly after the lions left, we would return back to homeostatic balance. Now, we're not zebra. We have a couple of things that impact our stress response. One, we can ruminate and perseverate on things. Things can be in our past, but they stick with us and keep our stress response activated and elevated, which can produce a wear and tear on our minds, bodies, and behaviors. We also can engage in what we call an anticipatory stress response. We don't even ever have to experience the lion. We can imagine a situation where the lion might present itself, and we can wig ourselves out. Many people do this on the way to work. They're driving in. They're already anticipating all the stressors. They've already activated their stress response. You felt like you put a full day's worth of work in and you haven't even started work. That's because of the anticipatory stress response. What that means is we can stay at heightened and chronic levels of stress that really impact our ability to think clearly, function well, and make decisions that are in our best interests and those who we care about the most.
One of my favorite Mark Twain quotes, you probably know it, but it's I've had a lot of worries in my life, most of which have never happened.
Exactly. It's that anticipatory, our perceptions and our ability to imagine scenarios and really ramp us up is because of our prefrontal cortex. Our darn frontal lobe can get the best of us in terms of anticipation.
Yeah, blessing and a curse, huh?
And what it does is lead to this idea of allostatic load, and that's when stress accumulates. We can take cotton swabs, hair samples, and we can measure the amount of stress the body's experiencing at any given moment. And people who have high allostatic load, it starts to impact their bodies, their minds, and behaviors. I know early on during the COVID situation, I would get up in the morning, I would look at the darn Johns Hopkins website first thing in the morning and look at the numbers, and I was getting chest pain. It's like, oh man, something's going on here. Stress has a way of accumulating, and if you don't give yourself a break and have a way of managing it, it will impact physical well-being. So it impacts our body, it can impact our mind. And ultimately, if it's impacting our body and our mind, it manifests in terms of our behavior, because that's what's going on below the surface. We have heightened stress, and we're motivated to engage in certain behaviors as a result of that stress response. Here's the thing though, I don't want to make stress bad. Stress can be good. And so we need to understand that stress actually serves a purpose for us. If we were never stressed or had no stress activated, people wouldn't care. You wouldn't care about anything. So moderate, manageable levels of stress are actually super good for our performance and well-being. We focus better, we perform, we problem solve better, we collaborate better. If we don't have any form of stress activated, then our body just, it doesn't care. We don't care. Our motivation's not there. Now, the tipping point is when we have too much of it. And so that's the issue, is when people become disorganized in their thinking, they tend to make poor choices, and that's when stress becomes too much. So you can imagine, as an educator or a parent or a family member or a community, a person engaged in kind of civically in society, there are situations in which things happen out there. Someone cuts us off while we're in a parking lot, and our stress response becomes so activated, we start saying and doing things that if we were cool, calm, and collected, we'd never say someone should be acting that way. And so it becomes so much, we lose access to our rational, logical thinking part of our brain. So life is stress. Yeah.
I love that. It's just a reminder to me that I literally physiologically can sometimes lose access to parts of my functioning. And to be aware of that is so important. And I think a lot about, like, you know, reframing stress as potentially a positive thing is so helpful to me. One of my favorite notions that Brene Brown talks about is guilt is actually a motivating emotion. She says it's quite a healthy emotion. She says shame, right? Guilt is I've made a mistake. Shame is I am a mistake. And shame sends us down that spiral, sort of the far end of stress, which is like rolling over, I can't function, versus guilt. Like if we develop a positive relationship with something like guilt or stress, it can actually be a motivating, healthy, productive thing.
Oh, I mean, emotions have actions. They're called emotion-action relationships. So anger serves a purpose and value too, which the civil rights movement happened, or we try to continually improve things if people didn't get angry about certain circumstances that are unjust. So there's emotion-action relationships. The issue is when the emotions become too intense and we lose access to rational, logical thinking parts of our brain. So we start to engage in irrational behaviors that could potentially make situations worse for ourselves or the people we care about. The notion that life is stressful, and that's okay, because you can create a meaningful life. You can't create a meaningful life without stress. I would urge you to think about anything that's truly meaningful and that you value so much, and imagine if stress was not paired with that. Anything that I guarantee you think is super meaningful and valuable in life, stress comes along with that work. And so it's not like stripping away stress. It's being able to develop the skills, the strategies, creating routines that enable us to confront stress, manage stress, and continue to make the types of choices and behaviors that are aligned with our values and enable us to be the person we want to be. So coping is when we confront stress, we feel adequately prepared to manage the circumstances. So if I have insufficient coping, things are going to happen and I don't think I can handle them. And so part of coping is our own ability to regulate our emotions, the internal experiences, basically our physiology. That's what an emotion is. You say you're angry, all you're doing is commenting on your physiology. We have thoughts. Thoughts aren't fact. They're just words between your ears, being able to manage those words between your ears or images so they don't get the best of you. Managing our impulses and urges to engage in certain behaviors, and taming and taking that physiological edge off to make things seem like they're feasible and doable. Because when they get really ramped up, we feel like all things are falling apart on us. And the goal is to be able to confront environmental experiences and stay in a regulated state. Now, as educators, students are part of our environments and are often the kids that get us upset. And so we have to consider them as part of the environment where our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors start to get out of hand, and we can potentially say and do things that, one, are run against our values and ultimately make the situation worse for the kid potentially, and for the class we're working within in the long run. So the resilience piece, so we got stress, we're hardwired with it, it happens, it really ramps us up, we got to be able to manage it. The coping is the skills and strategies, and the resilience is our ability to survive. And the survive component of resiliency is to be able to bounce back and handle challenging and adverse situations versus succumb, kind of fall over in response to those. And the thrive element means even when we're not under adverse circumstances, how do we actually optimize our well-being and our ability to flourish and get the most out of life? So you can look at resilience as an idea that applies to everybody. It's, yes, certain people have a greater need to be supported through environments and skills to be able to manage what life throws at them, but nobody gets out of life without stress and adversity. Resiliency is a concept that applies to all of us because we're all going to have to survive. Right now is a great example that we're surviving and making it through a circumstance, and we got to be able to bounce back and maintain healthy development despite the challenges it's presenting. And then we're going to have opportunities to thrive, and then that's our ability to optimize how we're functioning, feeling, and performing. So we developed, I was at the University of Washington, I'm at the University of Minnesota. We developed it's called the Achiever curriculum. It was really for adult well-being and performance. It was a really rotten way to organize well-being promoting. We had to make the word achiever, all the practices fit. That's why A stands for this long sentence, because it was part of this project called the Early Achiever. We were working with early childhood educators, and the goal was to promote their resiliency and well-being in the work that they do to optimize their performance and their satisfaction with the work they're doing so they can tap back into that reason why they got in the job in the first place. So these were the practices. We now have organized them kind of in a more digestible sequence, and these are what I want to cover throughout the remainder of this. So in the Achiever Resilience curriculum, and this is all about stress coping and resiliency, kind of an overview like we did in terms of what is stress, coping, and resiliency, what are the key terms. We begin with values clarification, then we go into mindfulness-based practices. Now from this, there's no assumption that everybody should like everything equally. It's considered a modular approach where people experiment with different resiliency and well-being promoting practices and select the things that work for them. For example, mindfulness, many people treat it as a lifestyle and they live according to it, like it becomes part of their identity and who they are. Mindfulness for some people just doesn't work for them, nor are they interested in it. So then you say your only route to well-being is to engage in mindfulness-based practices, and so you can't actually be well and manage? No, experiment with it, try it out. You might find there's some utility. In mindfulness, there's multiple different ways you can practice it. Try to see if one of them works for you. If it doesn't, oh well, focus on some other area that might be beneficial for you. So it's more about helping people select the things that really fit for them and work for them versus trying to create a model where if it doesn't work for you, then, oh my goodness, something's wrong. Because if you can't make mindfulness work, then how can you actually cope and manage life? Something really must be wrong with you. Instead of like, what works for whom? And so that's the idea here is none of these have to be our requirements in order to achieve coping and resiliency. So the really basic premise is, as an educators, we got to serve others from the inside out. We have to give ourselves permission to manage ourselves and take care of ourselves in order to be best in the service of others. And we have tons of evidence to suggest that those who actually pay attention to that are able to, and take that seriously, interact more effectively, that contribute to more positive cultures and climates, and ultimately they're more satisfied with their work. So the idea is we all can become resilient. This is Ann Maston's work at the University of Minnesota, who's the foremost expert in resilience. She calls it ordinary magic because it's not magic. It's just an ordinary process to become resilient. And it's things we can learn. It's things we can acquire and apply and do in our lives. And that's what enables people to become resilient. And it's not some magical, mystical process by which people are able to achieve resilience.
One of my favorite strategies from Brene, again, back to Brene, she's one of my favorites. You talk about like giving people permission to live from the inside out. And she literally talks about one of her most practical strategies is actually writing herself a permission slip for whatever it is she wants to do that day. And it's right. There's all the science around like writing down your goals, but there's something powerful about writing out today. Like I'm giving myself permission to spend 15 minutes in a mindfulness practice, or I'm giving myself permission today to help these two people in this way. And allowing yourself to do that is actually a big part of the quote unquote ordinary magic.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Most adults start to plug in and have tons of obligations professionally and privately and forget to take care of themselves and don't give them permission or schedule in these types of activities for themselves. And so they start to lose sight of it. And what that does is start to kind of chip away at their well-being and functioning. So part of it is, I like to say, schedule it in like a dentist appointment or a haircut or going to the grocery store. This stuff you have to be intentional about integrating into your life and really factor it in. And it isn't being arrogant. It isn't being vain. It's not selfish for you to do this because you are going to be a better human as a result of it. And you're going to better care for those people and nurture those people who you care about the most.
Seems like a worthwhile pursuit.
So the idea of clarifying values is a starting place, like identifying what matters most. This is a little bit fuzzy stuff, but it's meaningful in the sense of what motivates us, what gives our life a sense of purpose and meaning. The way to think about values is they can't be crossed off. You can't cross off a value. A goal you can cross off. So if I have a value for traveling and experiencing different cultures, traveling to China is a goal. I'm not done doing that. If I want to be a loving, caring husband, just taking my wife out to a dinner on a Friday night doesn't mean I'm done being a loving, caring husband. That's something I can cross off. And it's aligned with my values. So values help orient us and give us direction, both professionally, privately, and other areas of our life. They help us determine what matters most, and they guide our decisions and behaviors. Because the thing is, stress and other things can start to boss us around and make decisions for us, or becoming really emotionally reactive. Was that your values that made that decision, or was that stress or anger or anxiety making that decision? And they transform the interpretation of our experiences. I use an example of, I want to be a caring, responsive dad. I have a weak gag reflex, so I vomit easily when I smell nasty stuff. So I've barfed on both of my daughters when I changed their diapers. And so I didn't like changing diapers. But then I realized if I use my values, like it transforms the experience. That becomes an experience to grow a connection versus a nasty, gross thing that I'm doing. So if you really connect to your values, it can transform your experiences and you interpret them and see them differently. And that's how powerful values can be. And so you can turn what is mundane, annoying, and aversive experiences and actually experiences that are aligned with your values. And so that's what spending the time to clarify them can serve that purpose.
You should talk to them about their values as well and see if that aligns, if they're if they're okay with the experience. No, I love that premise. There's a couple things I think about there. One, which is I think clarity drives consistency. Right? When we're really clear on why we're doing a thing, we're always going to be more willing to do that thing, especially in the face of adversity. And most people try to jump right to the habit development part before they do the value clarification part. And that's a key step, because if I don't have purpose, I don't know what I'm fighting for, then when I don't feel like it, I'm not going to do it. And that's totally a big deal. And then I love just that, again, ordinary magic, right? And David Foster Wallace in his speech talks about this is water, right? The true experience of education is more about awareness. It's more about how we see the world as opposed to what we see in that world. And so to pay attention through the lens of our values can make everything rich.
That's it. I mean, the thing is, we start to lose contact with our values. And so values reflection helps ground ourselves back to our values. There's studies, if you get parents before they walk into the door, so to speak, after working, and you get them to connect to their values as a parent, they're more likely to engage in behaviors consistent with their values, and then they feel more satisfied as a parent. But if you don't do that and you don't check in with your values, I'm going to let the stress and all the workload and fatigue determine how I behave. My kid wants my attention. I don't acknowledge the bit of attention. I go veg out and watch TV or check emails, and now I'm behaving inconsistent with my values. So the goal of clarifying them is to use them. And one other way we use them is to identify very specific concrete behaviors that we can engage in today, tomorrow, or next week that allow us to bring to life our values. And so we let our values guide and dictate our behaviors rather than feeling stressed out. And so we it's paradoxical in some ways, because sometimes we really don't feel like doing something. And that thing when we don't feel like doing it, it starts to lead us to engage in behaviors that are inconsistent with our values. So you almost have to go against the grain. But when people engage in their values, like I call my brother, I don't feel like talking to him on the phone because I'm tired, but I do it instead despite feeling tired. And then I reflect on that, and I feel like I'm being the type of brother I want. It's someone who's checking in and constantly being a person of support for him. Now, the way the rubber hits the road, there's activities you can do. And one's called the bullseye activity, and we can share this with you all. And the goal is you have your values, you separate the bullseye into quadrants, and you throw your dart and you place your dart how close or far away from your values you're currently living. And then if you're not in the bullseye in that area, so like your professional values, how close are you living consistent with the professional you want to be? Or in your private act, how in terms of your family, how consistent are you behaving with your values? And if you're not in the bullseye, then your goal is to take an action step and identify a concrete behavior to move yourself closer to that bullseye. And when we live consistent with our values, life satisfaction goes up, likelihood of depression goes down, certain types of anxieties that start to drip away when people are engaging in very specific values, behaviors that are consistent with their values. So now I want to move into the next idea, and this is where it's more about managing what you focus on and taking control over our attention. We call it attention training. You can't necessarily control what you initially pay attention to, but you can control what you do next with your attention. So attention is that which grabs and possesses the mind. So that's what attention is. So that which grabs and possesses the mind is going to impact how you feel and behave. Now, we're hardwired to pay more attention to bad than good, and there's survival reasons for that, but that's not necessarily good because we're more likely to pay attention to the bad in others than good. And there's lots of research and science to back this up. We're more likely to pay attention to bad in our circumstances than all the good things. Why can't we get positive media to exist and flourish in our country? Yet media flourishes in other ways that focus on negativity. I mean, people have really tried to make like positive news work, and it really and they have a hard time making a viable business because they can't get enough people to tune in to learning about all the good in the world. But people want to pay attention, so it gravitates attention. It grabs attention. Now, if you pay attention to bad or things that are going wrong, how do you feel? Well, you're going to amp up your physiology. You're going to feel more stressed out. And that can, take a wear and tear on our mind, bodies, and behaviors. So attention training is actually purposefully and intentionally training your attention to focus on the good in life. And so there's ways to pay attention to the positive, really searching for the silver lining, choosing to see the positive in others versus the thing, I don't like how they said that, or I don't like how they look, or why are they wearing, like catch yourself doing that and purposely force yourself to identify things that you value, you see as positive in others. We call them positive go-to staples. When you find yourself attending to something that's negative, your go-to staple is something that gets you out of that rut and causes you to focus on something more positive in your life, and that can impact how you feel. Now, gratitude is a specialized form of attention training that actually cultivates an emotion, an emotional response that has tons of benefits. Because ultimately, gratitude is an emotional experience. It's this deep, heartfelt thankfulness and appreciation for some facet of life. And there's certain practices we can go through. And in the course, we go into each one of these, what they look like. But for here, these are the types of practices you can incorporate into your life. Weekly gratitude journaling, thank you notes for the small little things that pop up into your experience that you're really thankful for, gratitude letters, visits. Now we can do virtual types of gratitude exchanges. But when we take a moment to focus on those things that are going right, that we're deeply thankful for, and here's the science would say, you don't only think about the thing you appreciate or you're thankful for, you imagine the absence of that thing. What if that person didn't exist? Or what if that experience didn't happen? And that creates deeper processing. Because if you treat gratitude practice as a to-do list, okay, list 5 things. Okay, got that out. Why am I not experiencing the benefits from gratitude? Gratitude has to be processed at a deeper level in order to get the benefits, because you're actually bringing your attention and really analyzing why you're grateful and thankful for a person, an experience, or something that life has afforded you as a gift.
So good. That's a new one for me, Clay. I love that concept of contrast, right? What is there to lose is a more powerful statement than just, this is what I have.
Yeah, Robert Emmons from UC Davis is, I think, one of the foremost scientific researchers on like tweaking and observing how do you maximize the yield of gratitude practices, and that component produces way more benefits. It's not only analyzing what you're grateful for, but imagining the absence of that. And so you start to really get thankful and grateful. And that's when, when you're driving and you're thinking about someone who's really had an impact and you're brought to tears. Usually you're not only thankful for that person existing, you're imagining like, what if they weren't here, or you're missing. And that's gratitude. It's like, oh gosh, yes, man, I love that person. And they mean so much to me.
Yep. Such a simple, powerful tweak. I love that.
So inner helpful thoughts. This is really from cognitive behavior therapy. We got to get a handle on our thoughts, because if we can't manage our thoughts are going to ramp up our emotions. And it's called fusion. Cognitive fusion is when thoughts dominate how we feel and behave. Thoughts can't make you do anything, but if they're unmanaged, thoughts make people do all kinds of things, because the thoughts begin to kind of command them, as if you're an avatar in a video game and the thought is controlling the joystick and making you go left, right. Thoughts can't make us do anything. They feel like they can, but thoughts have such powerful properties where we feel like we have to do things when we have the thought. Now, I can give you examples. I can make you salivate in your mouth by just imagining going through an orchard and picking a just ripe, luscious lemon, and you smell it and you bring it into the kitchen and you wash it off, and out of the pores, the smells are coming. You cut through that lemon, you take the deepest bite and suck in the juices. I can make you salivate by just saying words. That's how powerful words are. Now imagine when the words are happening between your ears, that's when people really take them as literal truths. And when you take your thoughts as literal truths and they're unhelpful thoughts, that means you could engage in unhelpful behavior. So the goal here is to recognize that sometimes we have unhelpful ways of thinking in response to our circumstances, and we need to look at our thoughts for what they are. They're thoughts, they're not fact. And we need to be able to look at them, analyze, dispute them, and reframe them if we determine they're unhelpful. And unhelpful means if you let the thought command and dictate your behavior, would you behave consistent with your values? And if the answer is no, then that's not a helpful thought. It doesn't allow you to achieve your goals. It doesn't allow you to be the person you want to be. So you need to repurpose and help that thought and challenge it to be more helpful. And so thoughts, this is at the heart of like cognitive therapy. If you look at like Aaron Beck, who developed cognitive therapy, the breeding ground for depression are the cognitive triad. And that's I suck, my future sucks, my world sucks. And that creates a bleak outlook on life that causes people to withdraw from life. And if you withdraw from life, you come in less contact with reinforcing experiences. And so one of the antidotes is cognitive restructuring, really starting to dispute and challenge those thoughts about self, future, and the world, and repurpose them to be more helpful. And we can treat depression, but you don't have to have depression to use this. This is a life skill to recognize that our thoughts aren't fact, and we can analyze and repurpose them if they're unhelpful to us. Now, we are all emotional creatures. Things happen, our physiology gets ramped up, and we come up with labels for our physiological reactions. Because really, many would say that an emotion is an internal subjective experience that is based on our physiology and the thoughts we're having. And then we come up with some type of language-based label. So if I feel like my fists are clenched, I have heat coming out from my collar, and I'm clenching my jaw, and I'm having thoughts like aggressive thoughts, like I want to tell that person to shut up or do something, I would label I'm angry or frustrated. I'm just labeling those experiences. Now, if we can manage our emotions, like managing anger results in pro-social protest or assertiveness. Unmanaged anger can be aggression and violence, which defies the whole purpose. Anxiety, unmanaged, results in avoiding situations that you shouldn't avoid, or coping maladaptively in ways that are unhealthy. But anxiety can serve a purpose. It helps us focus. We realize there's some type of threat, and we want to resolve that threat, and we need to problem solve it to handle it. And so there's strategies we can do to essentially manage our emotions. I like to look at it as we all have a life bus. Our goal is to be the driver in our life bus. In our bus, we have unruly passengers, and we have some really cool passengers. The unruly passengers, though, really try to convince us to let go, get out of the driver's seat and give up the steering wheel. And that's what emotions do. They try to convince us that we have to give up something and we got to do something, but then we stop, behaving in a values-based way. The goal is to recognize you'll always have those passengers on the bus, but we need to keep them in the back of the bus. So we have to check in. Where are the unruly passengers? How close are they up to the front? What do I need to be able to keep them in the back of the bus? There is no emotion regulation strategy that enables us to just get rid of emotions. So there's no treatment where you say, okay, poof, anxiety gone from you. Anger, we will eradicate it. Instead, it's learning strategies and skills to be able to manage those emotions. Now, here are some. Some of you are familiar with name it to tame it. Really, from a scientific standpoint, that's called identifying, labeling, and quantifying negative emotions. That creates what we call distancing. So you start to separate and you start to look at the emotions. And when you separate, that allows your physiological response to come down. When your physiological response comes down, your frontal lobe comes more back into play. We have relaxation strategies. Relaxation's incompatible with stress. You can't be relaxed and stressed or emotionally reactive at the same time. It just is impossible. If you don't believe me, go get a massage, like a really good one, and try to get angry at someone. Like, go for it. See if it can happen. You won't be able to do it. Relaxation strategies are different than distraction tactics. Distraction tactics are to get out of your mind and into something else And when you get into something else, you stop kind of the cognitive rumination and you allow the emotional edge to come out. Self-soothing practices via the senses, you're introducing stimuli that are soothing through the senses. In classrooms, I create places like, I call them Hawaii. If kids are upset, I don't call them the cool down spot because it's kind of stigmatizing. Hey, go to the cool down spot, because you're basically telling the kid. We call them like Hawaii or something. What do you go when you go check out Hawaii? You can hear sounds of the beach. There's smells you can do. There's things you can see in terms of relaxing, things that can promote relaxation. There's a variety of emotion regulation strategies that we can apply in our own lives to be able to regulate ourselves when we start to become emotionally aroused in response to certain situations, so we can still be in our frontal lobe and make those kind of rational, values-driven decisions and behaviors. Here's my soapbox. They're called therapeutic lifestyle choices because they're often more effective than any drug or psychotropic medication you can take, but they have a huge impact on our well-being and performance. We truly don't know the prevalence of mental health problems, for example, after controlling for sleep problems. We have a sleep epidemic in the United States where people don't value sleep as if the quality of their life depended on it. Middle schoolers, for example, 80 to 90% are chronically sleep deprived. We do not know what people's functioning would be if we actually got them the sleep that they need. We spend a third of our lives doing it. Sleep impacts virtually every aspect of our life. Many people aren't getting sufficient sleep. If you said, when are you the best functioning version of yourself? You know it's when you're well rested. You wake up, you have a little pep in your step, you look in the mirror, you don't have like bags under your eyes, you actually think you look pretty good relative to other days when you look like a train wreck. And you know what it's like when someone says, you look tired. You're like, oh, thank you. You're saying I look like an ugly version of myself. Thank you very much. Sleep is such an essential physiological regulation component to our well-being that many people just don't nurture it and take it that seriously. So, what's the formula for good sleep? I'm going to talk about 3 of these, really: sleep, exercise, and nutrition. I honestly think if we handled these big 3, what we have left with in terms of mental health problems isn't a ton, because we don't know what the true prevalence of mental health problems. Sleep and exercise are actually treatments for mental health issues. And then if we actually maintain a balanced, reasonable diet, what's the leverage we can get in terms of our physical and physiological well-being? So when we talk about sleep, there's 3 components. Are you getting enough sleep? Then enough sleep is the time you spend in your bed from when you go down and when you get up. But some people have interrupted sleep. So they can fall asleep good, they just can't stay asleep. So quality sleep is actually being able to stay asleep when you fall asleep. And then many people struggle because our bodies have a circadian rhythm or a body clock, and they never allow their body to get in sync because they don't have consistent wake time and down times across days of the week, or for students in particular, week in and week day, bedtimes and wake times are way off. And the body, it's as if you're getting into a jet and flying from LA to New York. That's what you're doing to your circadian rhythm when you don't have consistent sleep, bedtime and wake times. And so good sleep is really taking these 3 components super seriously and treating it as if the quality of your life and your life longevity depended on it, because it does. And if you want to prevent things like neurodegenerative disorders like Alzheimer's and dementia, sleep is critical because it essentially washes off plaque that accumulates through the day from neurons and decreases the likelihood of neurodegenerative diseases. So sleep's virtually related to every kind of well-being indicator that we can even look at. Yet many people don't really value it as such. So how do you get better sleep? We come up with what we call the reset model. And reset is an acronym that stands for routines, your environment and the comfort items. The S and the E are stress and emotions. Many people struggle the most when they go to lay in bed. That's when all the thoughts of the day and the stress and the worry and the obligations and the to-do list come to the fore. It prevents them from falling asleep, or it causes them to wake up and have interrupted sleep. And then we think our young people are rotten with technology when it comes to bedtime. There's research indicating parents are worse, and we're modeling the non-example by having technology there at our bedside, and it's interrupting our sleep. Typically 30 minutes prior to bed, technology should be off. And if there is technology, it should have low-level stimulating environment, because you're essentially prepping your body to fall asleep. There's things with blue light that keeps you up. It activates the pineal gland. Even though you're able to fall asleep, you can't get to deep sleep, which is the restorative sleep. So when we help people support, we come up with the reset model, and we give them strategies under each of these areas where they can actually improve their sleep hygiene. When we worked with educators, this has been the thing that's been most beneficial, is they started to get even 20 to 30 more minutes of sleep, and all of a sudden their well-being, their functioning in their professional roles go up. The last piece I'm going to touch on here is maintaining healthy social connections. And there's 4 kind of key ways we think about maintaining those healthy social connections. One is seeking social support. Typically, we split it up into 3 types. There's emotional support you need. There's informational support. You need advice or suggestions with stuff. And then there's instrumental support. You need actually help with tasks and different things. Most people haven't thought about who they should go to for different social support, and they're actually seeking social support from the wrong people. How many of you have ever been involved in a conversation where you've talked about something that's kind of stressing you out, and someone's tried to one-up you? And that's not helpful social support. They're like, oh yeah, you think your day's bad? Mine was way worse. It's like, whoa. And so you're going to social support to the wrong person. And we all have those individuals in our lives where it's like, oh, they're trying to one-up me. This isn't helpful. Or they give rotten advice. That's not the advice you're looking for in order to solve a problem. Or you ask them for help, and they don't have a pattern of providing help when needed. So the other is really selfless acts of kindness that are about doing good deeds for others. This has that paradoxical effect. Even though you're doing it for an altruistic reason, the person who is the good doer, it actually gets those benefits. People feel more connected with others. I like to think there's many opportunities to volunteer in general. That is just a whole umbrella of different ways we can do good deeds for others and reap those benefits, to feel connected, but feel connected with others in a very specialized way. We're doing things with things we don't even want to be thanked for. We're doing it because we care, but it does produce benefit back to the individual. Mentorship is a specialized form of a relationship, and people get significant benefits out of either receiving the mentorship or providing it. Most people, though, aren't actively pursuing mentorship opportunities. And this requires invitations and requests and being very intentional. Mentorship, if you're going to be the recipient, you're identifying someone who's slightly more skilled. Think about the zone of proximal development. Imagine if you had someone in all the areas of your life that was more skilled than you, that you could go to for mentorship, and they were trying to scaffold your development. You would develop and grow. I would develop and grow more as a husband, a professional, if I had mentors in those various roles who are working with me in my zone of proximal development. What am I capable of doing alone, but what am I capable of doing in partnership with someone who's more skilled and can relationally work with me? That's a unique form.
Yeah, one of the two-way street, right? Like one of them is asking, how can I help? My friend Scott Bakovich so beautifully says, it's not what we give, it's that we give. And then not only how can I help, but asking for help. So both of those directions of help being critical for that, this sort of positive social connection.
And we know it's a valuable resource, mentorship, but we don't see enough actually being activated. And as adults, it becomes less so because we haven't created structures that enable it to happen. When we work with people, we actually try to encourage them. One, offer up mentorship to those who you know could benefit from it, and then seek it as a recipient, because there's areas for your own adult development and growth that represent opportunities to get better. And then this last is identifying role models, but really everyday role models in your lives that are real life examples of people who the way they function and behave are inspirational and provide real life examples that we can aspire to. And so spending time identifying who your role models are. A lot of people, if you ask them, who are your role models? Some people have them and they're very intentional and they're motivating and they're inspirational. But most people don't even have role models. And if they are role models, what comes up are celebrities and people who you might think are, not the type of inspirational figures that are going to inspire someone to, feel connected to a real person and inspire them to be a better version of themselves. So in kind of conclusion here, well-being and resilience is something that can be learned and cultivated. Part of that is we have things that are under our control. We can reflect and clarify our values, identify behaviors that enable us to behave consistent with them. We can train our attention to pay more to the positive and practice gratitude. We can really start to be able to manage our thoughts and feelings by developing strategies to turn unhelpful thoughts to more helpful ones. We can manage intense and negative emotions with emotion regulation strategies. A big category is feeling good physically. Do you have that physiological well-being to be resilient? Through our sleep, through the exercise, so we get the energy and our ability to, maintain a balanced diet. And then this idea of maintaining healthy social connections and being very intentional. We are social creatures. The more socially connected we feel and supported, the more resilient and the more we can kind of handle. Many educators feel isolated and there's not enough intentional work in buildings to help people become socially connected through creating opportunities to do good deeds for others, providing social support, creating mentorship opportunities, and creating scaffolds for people to identify role models within the system. When we start to be intentional about that work, people feel super socially connected and their overall resiliency goes up. So questions, comments, thoughts?
We got a lot of questions, but I know that it is late. Yeah, we've tried to cover a lot here, which I love. I think this is our philosophy in general at Character Strong, is like provide the 10,000 calorie meal and then figure out how to best digest it over time. So take what you need from today. Here's my thought, Clay. First of all, I want to share a comment from someone. PD I've listened to on resilience and stress, easily explained, great analogies and easy ideas to practice and consider. So a compliment to you. It is one of the reasons I love listening to you, and one of the reasons that I feel like I learn always so much just from like sort of the practical approach. And it's not always just like straight up practical strategies, but like understanding what's happening in my body, in my brain. That's like the key step one, right? Awareness before action, I think, is really important. And sometimes we want to just like skip to the magic bullet. And I apologize if people on here thought there was going to be a magic bullet. That wasn't sleep and exercise, and nutrition, and doing good. But surprise, those are the things we need to focus on. But there are practical models that we can navigate to set that up. So I want to share with the people who've joined us today really quickly what we've created together, right, Clay? I mean, we've spent a lot of time putting together this on-demand professional development, which includes, right, what you just talked about right now is an entire course inside of our on-demand professional development. And there's 11 modules in that first course on stress coping and resilience. So this is what we just sort of talked about at a very high level, but you break what you just did down into 11, 20 to 30, 40 minute module, so you can kind of take what you need as you need it. That said, we've also created thinking functionally about student behavior, establishing and maintaining and restoring relationships. So we are creating and have created a bunch of modules so you can sort of take it one piece at a time. So if anyone's interested in the on-demand PD that we have units in, myself, my co-founder John, and then Clay, he goes into much greater detail with all of these. And so I'm going to drop that link, or the team will drop that link into the chat right now. And I also want to acknowledge that a lot of people shared some really great questions. What I'm going to do is sort of curate those questions into a list, Clay, and why don't we make that a task that we can try to work together to get those answered. And in the follow-up resources, we'll link you to any areas where we can support answering that content. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great. And because there's tons of, I think, valuable concrete resources that, you know, people can continue to learn beyond this webinar.
Absolutely. So much good stuff. And I know people in the chat are saying, thank you so much for what you've shared, what you've brought. So again, an acknowledgement to you, Clay, and just so people know, I want to thank you for showing up here. We've randomly drawn someone from the chat to surprise today. Juliana Schulte, I think, from Chicago. Thank you so much for showing up. We love it when people are here live, and we did just drop our brand new merchandise. So we want to send you a free piece of Character Strong gear. So the team will be in touch with you about that. Yeah, we got the Be Kind face mask. That's actually buy one, donate one. So when you buy one here, we donate one to donateppe.org. Anyhow, all that to say, thank you so much, Clay, for being here together. As always, learn lots and a lot more to share. So we'll put together some follow-up resources. We will send you the video in full of what we just discussed here. We'll send you all of the slides, as well as a couple answers to some of those frequently asked questions that we got on the side. So thank you so much for joining today. Clay, great to have you here, my friend, and we will see each other again very soon.
Yeah, appreciate you. Appreciate Character Strong and everybody tuning in. Take care, everyone. Be well.